The call came on a Tuesday morning and it changed everything, though not in the way anyone expected. Callum Osei had been working the overnight shift at Ridgeline Auto Repair for 11 years. He was the kind of mechanic who could hear a problem before he saw it. A slight knock in the engine, a hesitation between second and third gear that most people would miss entirely. His hands knew the inside of an engine the way some people knew the inside of their own house. By feel, by memory, by the particular silence that meant something was wrong. He was not the kind of man people noticed when he walked into a room. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, with work-worn hands that were perpetually stained around the knuckles, no matter how hard he scrubbed. He wore the same navy coveralls every day. He drove a 2009 pickup that had 170,000 kilometers on it and ran perfectly because Callum maintained it himself on Sunday mornings the way other men maintained their faith. His boss was a man named Trevor Halloran, owner of Ridgeline, member of the local Chamber of Commerce, someone who shook hands at charity golf tournaments and had his photograph taken. Trevor had hired Callum on the strength of a single recommendation from a retiring mechanic who said, simply, "He's the best I've ever seen." Trevor had mostly forgotten that conversation over the years. What he remembered instead was that Callum was quiet, that Callum didn't come to the Christmas party, that Callum's truck looked out of place in the customer parking lot. That Tuesday morning, just after 7, an older man walked into the shop. He came in on foot, no car. He was wearing a wool coat that had seen better decades, a Veterans Affairs lapel pin on the left breast, and the careful, measured walk of someone whose knees had opinions. He stood at the service counter and waited. The receptionist, a young woman named Brianna, who had started 3 months ago, was on the phone. She held up one finger without looking at him. Then another call came in and she transferred to that. The man waited. He didn't tap the counter. He didn't sigh loudly. He just stood there with the patience of someone who had learned a long time ago that the world moved on its own schedule. Callum came out from the bay to grab a parts invoice from the back counter. He saw the man standing there. He saw Brianna still on the phone facing the window. "Can I help you?" Callum said. The man turned. His name was Walter Greer, though Callum didn't know that yet. And he had a quiet face, the kind that had probably smiled easily once and now smiled carefully, the way you do when smiling costs something. He explained that his car had broken down 2 blocks away. A '98 Buick LeSabre. He'd had it towed to the curb outside, but didn't know if it could make it into the bay, or if they'd need to push it. "What was it doing?" Callum asked. "Died at a red light, wouldn't restart, made a sound like..." Walter Greer paused, searching for the word. "Like a playing card in bicycle spokes, but louder." Callum nodded. "Timing chain, is that expensive?" Callum looked at the man, the wool coat, the lapel pin, the way Walter held himself. Not ashamed, not asking for charity, just asking a straight questions and deserving a straight answer. "Parts aren't bad on a Sabra," Callum said. "Come on, let's get it in and I'll take a look before we talk numbers." They pushed the Buick into the bay together, the two of them on a cold November morning, their breath making small clouds in the air. Callum got under it inside of 10 minutes. It was, in fact, the timing chain, worn through, skipped a tooth, which was why the engine had seized without warning. A clean job, 4, maybe 5 hours of labor. He came out from under the car and found Walter sitting on a plastic chair near the tool bench, his hands folded in his lap. There was a thermos on the bench nearby, Callum's, and without thinking about it much, he offered the man a cup of coffee. Walter accepted it with both hands. "You served?" Callum asked, nodding at the pin. "Princess Patricia's," Walter said. "2nd Battalion. A long time ago." Callum's father had served too, in Ghana before the family came to Canada, a fact that Callum did not share with everyone, but which meant that he understood something about what it cost a man to put on a uniform and mean it. He just nodded and went back to the car. The labor on a timing chain at Ridgeline was posted on the board at $95 an hour. At 5 hours, that was $475, plus parts, plus tax. Callum pulled the invoice template and stared at it for a moment. He thought about the wool coat. He thought about the thermos. He wrote down the parts at cost, what the shop paid, not what the shop charged, and wrote the labor as 2 hours instead of 5. He brought the invoice to Trevor's desk for processing, the way all invoices went. He didn't think it was a complicated decision. Trevor Halloran came out of his office 12 minutes later. "What is this?" he said. He was holding the invoice the way someone holds evidence. "Timing chain. Callum's Sabre, in Bay 3. I can see that. What I'm asking is why you've invoiced 2 hours of labor on a 5-hour job and parts at cost." "He's a veteran," Callum said. "He's on a fixed income, I think. The work's done either way." Trevor looked at him for a long moment. He had the particular expression of a man who considered himself fair-minded but was currently being asked to absorb a loss he hadn't pre-approved. "That's not your call to make," he said. "This isn't a charity. You fix the car, you charge the rate. If I wanted to run a discount program for veterans, I would have set one up." "I'll cover the difference myself," Callum said. "Take it from my pay. That's not the point." Trevor's voice had dropped, which was worse than when it was loud. "The point is you don't make financial decisions for this shop. You're a mechanic. I need you to understand that." Callum understood it. He also did not change the invoice. Trevor fired him that afternoon, after Walter Greer had driven away in his LeSabre, the engine running clean and even. Trevor said it was about workplace policy and the chain of authorization. He said it wasn't personal. He shook Callum's hand, which Callum thought was a strange thing to do when you were ending someone's 11 years of work, but he shook it back and went to clean out his toolbox. The other mechanics in the bay watched. 2 of them had worked with Callum for 6 years. Neither of them said anything. Callum didn't blame them. They had families. They had mortgages. He understood how the math worked. He drove his truck home and sat in the driveway for a while. He had $412 in his checking account. His rent was $960. He had a daughter, Amira, who was 7 years old and lived with her mother 2 days out of every 7. And on those days, he was the one who made her lunch and helped her with the French she was learning at school and watched her eat cereal at the kitchen table, like it was the most important thing in the world, because it was. He was not a man who had a lot of room for financial disruption. He called 3 shops over the next 2 weeks. One said they weren't hiring. One called him back and then didn't call again. The third brought him in for a working interview, which means they had him do a full brake job on a customer vehicle, watched him work, then told him they'd decided to go with someone with more customer-facing experience, which Callum understood to mean someone who looked different than Callum looked. He didn't say that out loud. He thanked them for their time. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Trevor Halloran had made some calls. The automotive repair world in their city was not large. Trevor knew the service managers at 2 of the dealerships and the owners of 3 independents. He had told them, in the careful language of professional concern, that Callum had a problem with following financial procedures, that he'd taken it upon himself to make unauthorized decisions about shop revenue, that it had been an ongoing issue. None of this was true, except the last incident which Trevor had described in a way that left out the veteran, left out the wool coat, left out the thermos, left out everything that would have told the actual story. Callum's phone stopped ringing. He picked up a shift shoveling a commercial parking lot through a friend of a friend. He took on 2 private repair jobs in his building's underground garage, a neighbor's brake pads, someone's serpentine belt, and charged barely enough to cover parts. He was good at being poor in a functional way, which is different from being good at being poor. 6 weeks after he'd been fired on a Thursday afternoon, he was at the food bank 2 kilometers from his apartment. He had been there once before, years ago, and he'd told himself at the time it was a one-time thing, an embarrassing thing, a thing he'd move past quickly. He told himself the same thing this time. He took the bag of groceries and said thank you and walked to his truck. There was an older man sitting on the bench outside the food bank, not waiting in line, just sitting, his hands on his knees, watching the street. He looked familiar. It took Callum a moment. It was Walter Greer. Walter recognized him at the same time. He stood up, which he did slowly because of the knees. "I heard what happened," Walter said. "Trevor Halloran's been talking. But not everyone in this city thinks the same way Trevor Halloran does." Callum didn't know what to say to that. He said he appreciated it. "My son has been looking for you," Walter said. His son's name was Nathan Greer. Callum had not made the connection. The last name was common enough. But Nathan Greer was the regional director of operations for a national fleet maintenance company called Northern Haul. They ran the maintenance contracts for commercial vehicle fleets across 4 provinces, delivery trucks, transit authority vehicles, emergency services support units. Nathan had been trying for 2 years to find a lead technician for their Ontario hub. Someone with diagnostic instinct as much as technical skill. Someone the younger mechanics would learn from just by watching. Walter had mentioned the mechanic who'd fixed his car to his son the day it happened. Nathan had pulled Callum's name off the invoice and tried to reach him through Ridgeline. And Trevor had told the receptionist to say Callum no longer worked there and leave it at that. Nathan found him through Walter. They met at a Tim Hortons on a Wednesday. Nathan Greer was in his mid-40s. Practical, in the way that people who manage logistics are practical. He cared about results and found most other things to be a distraction. He slid a job description across the table. Lead diagnostic technician. Full-time, salaried, benefits, company vehicle for work use, pension contribution. The starting salary was nearly double what Callum had made at Ridgeline. Callum read it twice. "I haven't talked to many people," Nathan said. "My father told me one story, and that was enough. He said you looked at an old man standing at a counter and you just helped him. No angle, no performance, and then you paid for it." Nathan paused. "That's the kind of person I want running my shop." Callum started 3 weeks later. What he found there was different from anything he'd had before. The shop was larger, quieter in a productive way, filled with younger mechanics who asked good questions and had been waiting for someone to answer them properly. He built systems for them, diagnostic checklists, training rotations, the kind of institutional knowledge that usually lived in one person's head and disappeared when they left. He stayed late not because anyone told him to, but because there was a problem to solve, and he wanted to solve it, which is the only reason anyone should stay late. Within 8 months, the Ontario hub had the lowest vehicle downtime rate in the company's national network. Nathan put that in a memo to corporate. Corporate sent someone out to observe the operation. The observer spent 2 days watching Callum work and went back and wrote a report that said, in the language of corporate reports, that the improvement was directly attributable to a single individual's technical judgment and leadership approach. Callum got a raise and didn't know about the report until months later, when Nathan told him over coffee. He told Amira about the new job on the first Sunday of the new year. She was eating cereal at his kitchen table, the same ritual, the same bowl, the same patient way she had of listening to things. And he tried to explain what had changed without making it a big production. She was 7. She asked if he would still be able to pick her up from school. He said yes. She went back to her cereal. He sat across from her and thought about a Tuesday morning in November and an old man standing at a counter with a wool coat on and a thermos of coffee, and the particular quiet of a man who has learned to wait without complaint. He thought about the invoice. He thought about Trevor Halloran's handshake. He didn't regret any of it. The math had been simple that morning. Walter Greer had served his country. He had asked for a fair deal and deserved one. The rest of it, the firing, the 6 weeks, the food bank, the bench, the Tim Hortons, the memo, the raise, that was the math that came after. It was the math Callum hadn't been able to see at the time. Maybe that's the thing about doing the right thing when it costs you something. You can't see the whole equation from where you're standing. You just know which number feels honest, and you write it down. Trevor Halloran's shop is still open. Business is average. The parking lot looks the same. Walter Greer's Buick LeSabre crossed 200,000 kilometers last spring. Callum knows because Walter sent him a photograph, Just the odometer, nothing else, with a single line underneath it, still running clean. There is a framed photograph in the break room at Northern Hall's Ontario hub. It is not of anyone famous. It's a picture someone took without planning to, on a Thursday afternoon the previous winter, of the lead technician crouched beside an apprentice, both of them looking at something under the hood of a transit bus. The younger man's face concentrated and serious, the older man's hand pointing somewhere into the engine. Neither of them is looking at the camera. Neither of them knows the picture was taken. It stays up because it looks like exactly what it is. One person teaching another person how to do something right. Who taught you to be honest when it was easier not to be? And what did it cost you before it paid you back?